Kefir. Kefir originates in the Caucasus Mountains. Local legend holds that the Prophet Muhammad gave the first grains to the people there, which is why they are still known today as the grains of the Prophet. Kefir is made by adding kefir grains to milk and letting it sit at room temperature for 18 to 24 hours. The grains are symbiotic colonies of bacteria and yeast, embedded in a polysaccharide matrix called kefirin, and resemble small cauliflower florets. When added to milk, the bacteria ferment the milk sugar, lactose, into lactic acid, while the yeast simultaneously breaks down the sugar into ethanol and carbon dioxide. The cultures digest lactose almost completely during fermentation, which is why kefir is often well tolerated even by those with lactose intolerance. What makes it special is that the grains grow during the process and continuously release new microorganisms without dissolving themselves. The result is a slightly fizzy, tangy drink. What fundamentally distinguishes kefir from yogurt is its microbial diversity. Kefir contains anywhere from 20 to 60 distinct probiotic strains, while yogurt contains around 2 to 7. Water kefir. According to current research, Mexico is considered the most likely place of origin for water kefir. There, the culture is known as tibicos, and the first water kefir crystals were spotted and collected on the pads of Opuntia cacti growing there. Despite the similar name, water kefir has little in common with milk kefir. The grains look entirely different, small, soft, translucent crystals, and they consist of a completely different culture of bacteria and yeasts. Those microorganisms convert sugar and nitrogen into lactic acid, with carbon dioxide and small amounts of alcohol produced as byproducts. The result is a lightly carbonated, mildly sour drink. To make it, sugar is dissolved in room temperature water and the grains are added. Next come unsulfured dried fruits. Figs or raisins are most common, which provide the minerals and nitrogen compounds essential to the metabolism of the microorganisms. A slice of lemon is often added as well. The acid it contains creates a more favorable environment for fermentation and inhibits the growth of unwanted bacteria. The mixture then ferments for 24 to 48 hours at room temperature around 20 to 25 degrees Celsius, or 68 degrees Fahrenheit to 77 degrees Fahrenheit. The type of sugar used shapes the flavor. Coconut blossom sugar, maple syrup, and brown sugar each produce a noticeably different result. What makes water kefir particularly practical is that the grains multiply rapidly. Within a few days, they double or triple in volume, which means there is always enough, and always enough to give away. Ayran. Ayran is the national drink of Turkey, with roots stretching back to at least the 11th century. The Turkish scholar Mahmud al-Kashgari documented it in his work Diwan Lugat al-Turk, the first known dictionary of Turkic languages, written at the time. The preparation is remarkably simple. Yogurt is mixed with water and seasoned with salt. There is no multi-day fermentation involved. Ayran is not a ferment in the classical sense, but rather a dilution and stabilization of already fermented yogurt. It is drunk as a refreshment or alongside meals. Traditionally, a large jug of ayran was always ready in the house. When guests arrived, whether neighbors stopping by or travelers coming from far away into a tavern or restaurant, the first thing that hit the table was that jug, alongside traditional glasses. Before any food, before any conversation settled, the ayran was poured. It was the gesture of welcome. The same idea exists across the wider region, each culture making it slightly their own. Duk is the Persian national drink. The base is essentially the same as ayran, but with mint added. Sometimes it is made sparkling with carbonation. Lassi comes from India and Pakistan, most often sweetened with fruit like the well-known mango lassi, or served salted. Laban is the Jordanian version, equally simple, equally rooted in the same tradition of fermented milk thinned with water. Filmjölk. Filmjölk, also called Sweden milk in Germany, originated in Scandinavia, where it remains most deeply rooted in Sweden and Finland to this day. The reason it developed the way it did comes down to climate. The Nordic environment was too cold for the heat-loving thermophilic bacteria that drive conventional yogurt fermentation. What emerged instead was a culture built for cold, fermenting at room temperature without any external heat source. Yogurt requires 104 to 113 degrees Fahrenheit, which is why making it at home demands a heated incubator or a warm oven. Filmjölk ferments at 64 to 72 degrees Fahrenheit, simply room temperature, using bacteria that are heat sensitive and would die in the conditions yogurt requires. After 18 to 20 hours, the result is a pourable, mild, gently sour, fermented milk that tastes noticeably less sharp than yogurt. Fili, not technically a drink, but worth mentioning while we are already in Scandinavia. Fili is a traditional fermented milk product, a yogurt in the broadest sense, and one of the oldest food traditions in Finland. It was originally produced in Sweden, from where it made its way to Finland during the centuries the two countries were united, roughly from the 12th century until 1809. What makes Fili unlike any other yogurt is its texture. Pull a spoon slowly out of a jar and it stretches into long rope-like strands instead of breaking clean. This happens because the bacteria inside produce a polysaccharide called phyllian, which gives the ferment its characteristic stringiness. On the surface grows a layer of the mold, Geotrichum candidum, which can be eaten. It feeds on the cream and forms a slightly fuzzy velvety crust on top. Phylli is most often eaten topped with sugar and cinnamon or served with fruit. Kumys, also known as ayrag, is fermented mare's milk. It is the traditional national drink of the Mongols, where horses are the most important animal in Mongolian culture. Raw mare's milk, called sam, has a natural laxative effect due to its high lactose content. To counter this and make it digestible, it is fermented, which converts the lactose into lactic acid, alcohol, and carbon dioxide. The fresh milk is poured into a large open leather bag which hangs beside the entrance of the yurt. Inside, the fresh milk is mixed with a special kind of yeast and is churned with a wooden paddle in a process that is repeated regularly throughout the day. There is a tradition in Mongolia that every person who enters the yurt gives the ayrag a few stirs. That stirring is not just ritual, it ensures even fermentation by distributing the bacteria and yeasts evenly through the liquid. The result is a lightly sparkling, mildly sour drink with up to 3% alcohol. Research also shows that the high content of polyunsaturated fatty acids in mare's milk can support the growth of new brain and nerve cells. Its counterpart in Mongolia is kormog, fermented camel's milk. Compared to kumys, it is thicker, more sour, numbs the lips, and carries more carbonation. Traditionally, Mongolians offer it to pregnant women, as the low-fat but calcium-rich milk is considered ideal for supporting the healthy development of the fetus. Shubat. Shubat is fermented camel milk, and it functions as an identity drink for Kazakh people, consumed not only in Kazakhstan, but across the neighboring countries where Kazakh communities live, including Russia, China, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan. It is drunk throughout the day, mainly after meals. The traditional preparation is straightforward. A small amount of previously soured milk is added to fresh, raw camel milk and left to ferment for 1 to 2 days at room temperature. The lactose disappears entirely during that process, fully consumed by the microbial community inside. What remains is a distinctly white drink, similar in appearance to other dairy products, but with a robust, tangy flavor that sets it apart. The finished product is rich in live bacteria, organic acids, amino acids, and vitamins B1, B2, and C. It also contains A2 beta-casein protein rather than the A1 beta-casein found in cow's milk, a structural difference that makes it easier to digest and reduces inflammation in the gastrointestinal tract. Fermented camel milk exists under different names across the world. Chal in Turkmenistan, Garis in Sudan, Duga in Ethiopia. The base is always the same: camel milk fermented. Morsik. Morsik is a fermented cow or goat milk drink from Kenya, deeply rooted in the traditions of the Kalenjin communities. It is prepared by fermenting cow or goat milk inside a gourd called a sotet, a carefully dried and treated vessel that gives the drink its distinctive smoky woody character. In Kenya, it plays a central role in hospitality and ceremony, present at births, initiations, and celebrations. It is widely referred to as a superfood among Kenyan communities and is recognized as the energy drink of choice for many of Kenya's greatest long-distance runners. Beer. Beer has been brewed for approximately 10,000 years, with some of the earliest strong evidence coming from ancient Mesopotamia. In 1516, Germany established the Reinheitsgebot, the beer purity law, which dictated that beer could only be made with barley, hops, and water. It became one of the most influential brewing rules in Europe and still shapes beer culture today. Beer is usually made from 4 main ingredients: water, malted barley, hops, and yeast. Barley is especially valuable because during malting, it develops the enzymes needed to break starch down into fermentable sugars, the sugars that yeast later turns into alcohol. Hops are the female flower clusters of the hop plant, and with hundreds of cultivated varieties in use, they are one of the main reasons different beers can taste so distinct. Bittering hops, which are high in alpha acids, create the bold bitter note. Aroma hops, which are rich in essential oils, create fruity, floral, citrusy, or earthy notes. The malt determines the sweetness, body, and color, anywhere from pale straw yellow to deep roasted black. The yeast produces the alcohol and contributes its own aromatics, like the characteristic banana note often found in wheat beer, and the water is rarely neutral. Soft water produces a lean, hop-forward beer, while hard water tends to push the malt character forward. Today, more than 170 million barrels of beer are produced in the United States alone every single year. Boza. Boza is one of the oldest fermented beverages in the world. Its name comes from the Persian word buz, meaning millet, the grain it was originally made from. Sources trace its origins back roughly 10,000 years to Mesopotamia, from where it spread into Central Asia, the Ottoman Empire, and the Balkans. The grain is soaked, cooked until soft, ground smooth, and boiled with water and sugar. Once cooled, a starter, either yeast or a portion of previously made boza, is added. The mixture then ferments at 20 to 30 degrees Celsius for 24 to 48 hours. hours. Lactic acid bacteria and yeast work together during this time, producing the acids that give boza its tangy flavor, along with small amounts of alcohol, typically around 1 to 2%. After fermentation, it is chilled to 4 to 5 degrees before serving. The result is a thick, creamy drink with a sweet, fruity, slightly tangy flavor. So thick, in fact, that it can be drunk or eaten with a spoon. In Turkey, it is traditionally served topped with cinnamon and roasted chickpeas. The earliest versions used millet exclusively. As the drink traveled across regions and adapted to local crops, corn and wheat became common alternatives. Kvass. Kvass is a traditional fermented beverage with a documented history spanning over 1,000 years in Russia, Ukraine, Poland, and neighboring Eastern European countries. At its core, kvass is a bread drink. Rye bread crusts are soaked in water and left to ferment naturally for 1 to 3 days, driven by wild yeast on the bread and lactic acid bacteria from the environment. The result is a lightly carbonated, mildly sour, malty drink with an alcohol content of just 0.5 to 1.5%. The fermentation adds lactobacillus culture and increases the bioavailability of the nutrients in the bread. Today, the name kvass covers more than just the bread version. Some of them are beet kvass, made by fermenting raw beets in salted water, lemon kvass, raspberry kvass, or honey kvass. The base principle is always the same: a simple ingredient, water, and fermentation doing the rest. Sake. Sake is a fermented rice drink with an alcohol content of 14 to 17%, slightly higher than wine. It is not a spirit. There is no distillation involved. In Japan, the word sake is actually a general term for all alcoholic beverages. The drink itself is called nihonshu. Rice cultivation arrived in Japan from China around 300 BCE during the Yayoi period, and with it, the foundation for one of the oldest cultural beverages in the world. Today, sake is brewed from a specific category of rice called sakamai, varieties cultivated exclusively for brewing, with an unusually high starch content that directly improves the quality and flavor of the finished drink. Sake is made from 4 ingredients: rice, water, koji, and yeast. What makes it unique among the world's alcoholic beverages is what happens during fermentation. The mold koji breaks down the rice starch into sugar. Simultaneously, yeast converts that sugar into alcohol. Both processes happen at the same time in the same vessel. This is known as multiple parallel fermentation, and sake is one of the only drinks in the world produced this way. Depending on the variety, it is served slightly chilled, but also at room temperature or warmed. Its closest relative is amazake, which translates literally to sweet sake. But traditional amazake contains no alcohol. The sweetness comes entirely from the koji mold, breaking down rice starch into sugar during fermentation. The result is a creamy, thick drink that has been consumed in Japan for over 1,000 years, originally valued as an energy source for physical labor. Makgeolli. Makgeolli is Korea's answer to what sake is to Japan and wine is to Europe. It is the oldest traditional rice wine in Korea, made from rice, water, and nuruk, a traditional Korean fermentation starter made from coarsely ground grain and water, naturally inoculated with bacteria, fungi, yeast, and lactic acid bacteria. Nuruk contains enzymes that break down the rice starch into fermentable sugars, which the yeasts inside then convert into alcohol. Unlike sake, it is not finely filtered, which is why it keeps its milky white color and characteristic cloudiness from the rice solids left behind. The alcohol content sits at 6 to 7%. The taste is slightly sweet, mildly sour, and naturally sparkling from secondary fermentation in the bottle. During the Korean War and its aftermath, rice became so scarce that in 1965, the government passed the Grain Management Act, making it illegal to use rice for alcohol production. A 700 to 800 milliliter bottle of makgeolli contains up to 70 to 80 billion lactic acid bacteria. That is the equivalent of drinking 100 to 120 bottles of yogurt. China has its own equivalent, Shaoxing wine. Named after the city of Shaoxing in Zhejiang province, it is built on the same principle: rice, water, and a starter culture. The result is an amber-colored rice wine with notes of ripe plum, dates, and caramel, with records of its production stretching back over 2,500 years. Chang and Tongba. Chang is a traditional fermented drink from the Himalayas, made from barley, millet, or rice, depending on the region. With an alcohol content of 5 to 7%, it is mildly alcoholic, cloudy, and lightly fizzy. It is shared across Tibet, Nepal, Ladakh, Sikkim, and Darjeeling. And across all of those cultures, it means the same thing: welcome. Tibetans drink it at funerals and celebrations, while working and while playing, at all ages. In central Tibet, it is especially tied to the harvest season. Farmers can't usually afford to buy alcohol, but they can easily make chang on their own, since they grow their own barley. The grain is cooked, cooled, and mixed with a dry yeast the Tibetans call pab. It ferments for around 7 days. After that, the ferment is diluted with water and left for another 24 hours. Then it is strained and ready to drink. Its closest relative is tongba. It comes from the Limbu community Valley of eastern Nepal and is also found in Sikkim and Darjeeling. It is made from millet alone, cooked, fermented with yeast over weeks, and then stored. When it is time to serve it, the fermented millet is packed into a large wooden or bamboo vessel, also called a tongba, and boiling water is poured over it. The drink is sipped slowly through a bamboo straw that filters out the grains. Once the liquid is gone, more hot water can be added to the same millet for additional rounds. They are far from alone. Every culture that ever grew grain discovered the same thing. Zutho from Nagaland is made from partially chewed rice, or judima, made from rice and a certain herb, is from Assam. In Africa, the pattern repeats. Umkombothi in South Africa, or pito in Ghana and Nigeria. Wine. The oldest widely accepted evidence of wine comes from the country of Georgia in the Caucasus, around 8,000-year-old clay vessels carrying the chemical fingerprint of fermented grapes. To this day, traditional Georgian wine is still made in a very similar way, in egg-shaped clay vessels called kvevari buried underground. Fruit already contains sugar and wild yeast live on its skin. Crush the fruit and fermentation can begin on its own. Yeast turns sugar into alcohol and carbon dioxide. This is why wine-like beverages appeared independently across many cultures. Anywhere sweet fruit grew, people eventually discovered fermentation. In Europe, wine usually means grapes, but the same principle works with any fruit that contains enough sugar, and around the world, it has been applied to many of them. In Northern Europe, where grapes struggle, the fruit of choice became the apple. Fermented apple juice is cider, cidre in France, cidre in Spain, Apfelwein in Germany. Do the same with pears and you get perry, a traditional drink that was already known in Roman times. Pears contain sorbitol, a sugar alcohol that does not fully ferment, which is why perry often retains a slight sweetness. In Brazil, the cashew tree produces a fleshy structure called the cashew apple, whose juice is sometimes fermented into a drink often referred to as cashew wine, typically reaching around 10 to 14% alcohol. Indigenous Tupi groups also produced kauim from cassava, chewing it before fermentation, so enzymes in human saliva could break starch into fermentable sugars. In southern Africa grows the marula tree, whose fruit can ferment quickly after falling due to natural yeasts. The fruit is used to produce marula beer, and more famously, the distilled cream liqueur, amarula. Palm wine and tree sap. The sap that runs inside palm and agave plants is already loaded with sugar, and the moment it leaves the plant, wild yeasts in the air begin fermenting it. In West Africa, including Nigeria, Ghana, and Cameroon, this produces palm wine, tapped from species such as oil palm and raffia palm. Fresh palm wine is sweet and low in alcohol. Within a day, it becomes more acidic and stronger. A very similar drink exists in southern India under names such as toddy, toddy, or kalu, tapped from coconut and palmyra palms in regions like Kerala, Tamil Nadu, and Goa. In the Philippines, the same process produces tuba, a coconut palm wine. And in Mexico, the agave plant gives pulque, the sacred drink of the Aztecs, made from agave sap called aguamiel. Mead. Mead, also known simply as honey wine, is, in all likelihood, the single oldest alcoholic drink humans ever made, with evidence of honey-based fermentation going back around 9,000 years in China. Mead is, at its core, nothing more than diluted honey left to ferment. It is rich in sugars, but it does not typically ferment on its own due to its low water content. Honey carries wild yeasts, and the moment it is mixed with water, fermentation begins on its own. The yeast converts the honey's sugars into alcohol, producing a drink anywhere from 3.5 to over 20%, depending on how much honey is used and how long it ferments. Sometimes fruits, spices, grains, or hops are added, but none of that is required. Honey and water is enough. It takes a bee roughly 20,000 trips and 4 million individual flower visits to produce a single pound of honey. Every bottle of mead represents a staggering amount of insect labor. In Ethiopia, mead is known as tej and includes a distinctive ingredient, the native plant geisho, Rhamnus prenoides, which acts as both a bittering agent and a microbial regulator during fermentation. In South Africa, the Xhosa people make ikilika. What sets it apart is the starter. Instead of relying on honey's wild yeast alone, brewers traditionally mix in the prepared roots of a succulent from the Trichodiadema genus to kick off fermentation. Kombucha. Kombucha is believed to have originated in northeastern China before spreading through Russia and Eastern Europe in the early 20th century, where it gained widespread popularity under the name we still use today. It is made by fermenting sweetened black tea with a SCOBY, a symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast, but can also be made with other teas like green or white tea. The tea is brewed, cooled to room temperature, sugar is dissolved into it, and the SCOBY is added. Over 7 to 14 days, the culture breaks down the tea and sugar into organic acids, carbon dioxide, vitamins, and small amounts of alcohol between 0.5 and 2%. The result is a lightly sparkling sweet-sour drink, a fermented alternative to soda or other soft drinks. A close relative is Jun, often called the champagne of kombucha. Instead of black tea and cane sugar, Jun uses green tea and raw honey. The SCOBY itself is adapted specifically to ferment honey. Its microbial makeup differs from a standard kombucha SCOBY, and the two are not interchangeable. Jun ferments faster, in just 5 to 7 days, at cooler temperatures between 18 and 22 degrees Celsius. The result is a lighter, more floral and delicate drink with a naturally high carbonation, noticeably less vinegary than classic kombucha. Congee. Congee is a tangy, salty, mildly spicy, fermented vegetable drink from North India, made by fermenting black carrots and beetroot in spiced water. It is often called India's original probiotic. It is made across Punjab, Delhi, and Uttar Pradesh, traditionally in the weeks leading up to Holi, the festival of colors, when the winter carrots are at their sweetest. The classic version uses black carrots, a deep purple variety native to North India and only in season from January to March. The carrots are cut into sticks, dropped into water with ground mustard seeds and salt, and left in direct sunlight for 3 to 7 days. There is no starter and no added sugar. The wild lactic acid bacteria living on the vegetables ferment their natural sugars into lactic acid, turning the liquid deep purple-red, tangy, salty, and sharp with mustard. When black carrots aren't available, beetroot is added to recreate that signature color. Tepache. Tepache is a fermented pineapple drink from Mexico. Historically, it was made with corn, but today it is brewed from the parts of the pineapple most people throw away. The skin and the core is combined with piloncillo, an unrefined raw cane sugar pressed into a cone, along with cinnamon and water. It is said to be commonly brewed even inside Mexican prisons because it needs almost nothing to make. No starter is required. The fermentation happens spontaneously, driven entirely by the wild yeast and bacteria that already live on the pineapple's skin. The yeast eat the sugars and produce carbon dioxide and alcohol, giving Tepache its fizz and a light alcohol content of around 0.5 to 4%, depending on how long it ferments. The longer it sits, the more alcoholic it gets. At the same time, the bacteria convert sugars into lactic acid, which adds a sour tang on top of the sweetness. The result is somewhere between sweet, fruity, and sour all at once. Tepache is a fast ferment. In a warm room around 77 to 86 degrees Fahrenheit, it is ready in about 3 to 5 days. In cooler conditions, it takes longer, usually 5 to 10 days.